I'm Guy McPherson, Professor Emeritus of Conservation Biology at the University of Arizona. I was paid to work at the University of Arizona for 20 years. For one academic year before that, I was at Texas A&M University. My PhD was granted by Texas Tech University in 1987. Throughout my graduate studies, I was pursuing knowledge about climate change as a part of the plant ecology and ecosystem ecology underpinning for my graduate research. So I pursued active service at the University of Arizona, meaning teaching and conducting research for 20 years. I voluntarily left that organization in May of 2009 because it appeared at that time that collapse of industrial civilization was the only hope, the only chance to prevent runaway greenhouse, to prevent an abrupt rise in global average temperature on Earth. We knew, according to the refereed journal literature, we knew nothing at the time about global dimming or the aerosol masking effect. We knew very little about abrupt climate change at all. And so I pursued what I thought was realistic evidence pointing to civilization being problematic on multiple levels. Involuntarily leaving active service at the university and establishing a homestead in southern rural New Mexico, I gave up a lot of privilege and became subject to a lot of personal attacks as a result of my professional life. So again, Professor of Conservation Biology at the University of Arizona, and what that means is that I have studied the primary pillars underlying conservation biology. Speciation, or how a species comes into existence and through what process and through what predecessors. Extinction, how and when the last individual, the last example of a species dies. And habitat. If I had a motto, it would be habitat, 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 because that's what really matters to all animals and plants, to all organisms, in fact, including human animals. I'm often asked to give an overview of the planetary situation at this point. It's clear that this version of civilization, and by civilization I mean the ability to grow, store, and distribute grains at large scale. It's clear that this version of civilization, industrial civilization, has many untoward outcomes that are generally ignored. Those include, as with every civilization, endemic misogyny, endemic racism, endemic monetary disparity leading to poverty. They also include the fouling of the air, the dirtying of the water, the essentially strip mining the soil and washing it into the ocean. They also include, as with every civilization, the emission of carbon dioxide and methane into the atmosphere, even if it's only by putting a spade into the ground and turning that shovel over when done at large scale that causes carbon dioxide and methane to be transmitted into the atmosphere. With respect to the latter phenomenon leading to climate change, global climate change, or what is sometimes called global warming, and for the most part, climate scientists have moved away from that term, global warming, towards climate change in recognition of the fact that warming is not evident at some particular places, at least for some particular times. So whereas the climate overall is warming, what that produces is extreme snowfall events and extreme cold events in certain places, sometimes for extended periods of time. But that's a result of overall planetary warming. It's a result of the profound increase in greenhouse gases in the atmosphere of Earth. So I want to talk briefly about that portion of the outcomes of industrial civilization. By that portion, I mean climate change, or global climate change, or overall planetary warming. Currently, the level of methane in the atmosphere is more than 240% higher than it was at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, commonly pegged at about 1750. In addition, the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is about somewhere around 40% or more higher than it was at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And of course, civilizations began thousands of years ago, so I'm not sure we should be using 1750 as the starting point for civilization or industrial civilization. Even industrial civilization began before 1750, so I think it's fairly conservative to use 1750 as the baseline for when climate change at the global level got underway. That said, we'll stick with that because that's a scientific standard. It appears at this point that we are in the midst of abrupt climate change, not merely the linear gradual increase in global average temperature that has been observed since the 1750s, but rather an event similar to what has been reported in the past in sediment records that indicates a global average rise in temperature somewhere at or greater than 8.7 degrees Celsius above the 1750 baseline over the course of the next 8 or 9 years. So that's a very abrupt rise in global average temperature, far beyond the ability of organisms to adapt genetically or otherwise. As a starting point, very few species are able to move from one location to another, certainly not the plants. Plants form the basis for our entire existence. They're the basis of the terrestrial food web and also the marine food web, in that case in the form of phytoplankton. So we're in the midst of, or the early stages of, this process or phenomenon called abrupt climate change that is certain to remove habitat for human beings on a planetary basis in the very near future. And we need habitat to survive. Now, you might argue that we can go to the International Space Station, and we have. We can go to nuclear submarines, and we have. And we can persist a while. But all of the, quote, habitat that is found for us in those locations is provided by the living planet, provided by Earth. All of the food for those locations comes from this living planet, not from someplace else. And so in supporting our existence in places like the International Space Station and nuclear submarines, we're really just treating those vessels as spaceships, much as we ought to have been treating Earth as a spaceship for all of these years. And we haven't. So we have largely spoiled the planet, the only planet on which we are known to survive and likely which we are able to survive. We also find ourselves in the midst of a couple of predicaments, and further than that, we find ourselves in the midst of a couple of paradoxes. One, civilization is a heat engine. Based on the laws of thermodynamics, primarily as reported by Tim Garrett at the University of Utah, civilization is a heat engine. No matter how we operate the thing, civilization itself is a heat engine. It doesn't matter if we use solar panels, wind turbines, wave power, or fossil fuels, civilization itself is a heat engine. And in every case, we're relying upon finite materials to power this set of living arrangements. The paradox is that civilization is a heat engine, but shutting off civilization heats the planet even faster because of the aerosols we put up into the atmosphere as a result of civilization. So civilization does a couple of things simultaneously. It puts up these greenhouse gases that serve as something of a blanket to hold the heat close to Earth. And civilization also puts up these aerosols, most notably sulfates associated with burning coal high in sulfur. And in the process, the planet cools through industrial activity. These aerosols, these sulfates, these particulates are put up in the atmosphere and serve as something of an umbrella. So we're simultaneously heating the planet with the blankets put up through emissions of greenhouse gases. So those greenhouse gases hold the warmth closer to the Earth. And we also put up these umbrella-style particulates which serve to cool the Earth. Within a matter of weeks after industrial civilization fails, the planet heats up catastrophically quickly, way faster than basically any organism on the planet, certainly including the most complex of organisms, Homo sapiens, could keep up. So that's one predicament associated, or one paradox associated with the predicament of global climate change is that we are heating the planet through industrial activity, and if we turn off industrial activity, we heat the planet even faster. If one paradox isn't enough, how about a second one? According to one of the most conservative scientific bodies in the history of the planet, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, in their vaunted fifth assessment, we need to use geoengineering. We need to massively geoengineer planet's atmospheric chemistry, or we're done. Or we've triggered such a rapid rise in global average temperature that civilization will fail, and so will all habitat for human beings disappear, along with a lot of other organisms on the planet. So we must massively geoengineer planetary chemistry, or we're done. The paradox is geoengineering doesn't work. There is no evidence to indicate geoengineering works, and lots of evidence to indicate that it won't work, as presented by among the most conservative scientific bodies on planet Earth, right up there with the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the United States National Academy of Sciences, in 2015, reported that geoengineering is unlikely to help the situation, and so did a European body of similar stature later that same year, 2015. So we have these two paradoxes. We must geoengineer the planet. Geoengineering won't work. We must stop warming the planet through emission of greenhouse gases. And yet if we do, the planet heats up even faster. As if two paradoxes were not enough, we also have another predicament. We're in the midst of the sixth mass extinction on planet Earth, a process which was described by conservation biologists in a paper in the prestigious Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. And the title of that paper includes the phrase biological annihilation. Biological annihilation, appearing in the title of a Referee Journal article. This is not the National Enquirer we're talking about, folks. This is not some hyperbolic rag that you pick up on your way to the counter at the grocery store. This is among the most conservative scientific bodies on the planet. The Referee Journal literature reporting via headline biological annihilation and indicating that it's underway. And so we're in the midst of the sixth mass extinction on planet Earth. We have these two paradoxes, either one of which indicates loss of habitat and therefore loss of humans on Earth in the near future. Oh, and by the way, in the wake of the previous 5 mass extinction events on Earth, many millions of years were required to recover beyond relatively small organisms, beyond microbes, and bacteria and fungi and small organisms, before we had a verdant, thriving planet again. So I strongly suspect that indeed we are in the midst of the sixth mass extinction on planet Earth, and that it will take many millions of years before very complex organisms such as Homo sapiens evolves again, if that ever happens. And according to the latest literature from the planetary sciences, it could be that that never happens. It could be that we strip away the atmosphere and destroy the biosphere for Earth forever. We don't know that. We don't know which of these outcomes is most likely to occur, and we will never know, because human beings are going to go away. We'll be among the earliest of the species to disappear as a result of the sixth mass extinction on Earth. So there we are. Two paradoxes, either of which points to our extinction in the near term. We're in the midst of the sixth mass extinction on planet Earth, which points to our extinction in the near term. And none of this can be overcome with anything resembling the technology we currently have at our disposal. None of it can be overcome with a shift in consciousness by human beings on planet Earth. We're in overshoot. We have so many other topics that I could talk about that point to our untimely demise. But all in all, it looks like we have a very limited future as a species on Earth. That brings me great sadness, and it's not at all a surprise. I'm disappointed. I'm certainly not surprised that we are in the midst of the sixth mass extinction, that our species hovers on the brink, that we have very little time left. At this point, I would say for almost all humans on Earth, almost all of the 7.5 billion human beings on Earth have somewhere in the neighborhood of weeks or months remaining. Years, decades, forget about it, unfortunately. As a concluding comment about the consequences of civilizations and the sixth mass extinction, it's important to point out the difference between the sixth mass extinction event and the previous five. This one, number 6, is proceeding far faster than any of its predecessors, eliminating at least 150 species every day, according to a conservative estimate by the United Nations Environment Program in August of 2010. And that's small wonder, because emissions of carbon dioxide and likely other greenhouse gases into the atmosphere is proceeding at least in an order of magnitude faster than at any time associated with those other mass extinction events. So small wonder that the current mass extinction event is proceeding faster than any others, given that the very definition of this set of living arrangements is must go faster. That's how we treat all of our lives. All of society, all of our communities, is we just must go faster. As a consequence, we're going faster towards extinction. We're going into the sixth mass extinction and proceeding faster than any mass extinction event in planetary history. Again, it's very, very sad, very disappointing, but not a big surprise. I mean, who could possibly think that we could foul our nest every single day and come out clean? If we actually come clean with the information, it's obvious that we aren't coming clean as a species. Why aren't we coming clean about this? Why don't we hear about the sixth mass extinction every day from the mainstream media? Why don't we hear about abrupt climate change every day from the mainstream media and the governments of the world? I'm not sure. I don't know why people do not present the evidence that we know is there. I have compiled the evidence, I've collated it, I have put it forward in many different ways, in language that is commonly understood. I don't know why we don't hear about this information from the mainstream media or the governments of the world. I can guess at a few things. For one thing, I don't think there's a big difference between the mainstream media and the governments of the world. I think that they're part of the same cabal that is interested in transferring money from the poor to the rich and not much interested in reporting accurate information. The same can be said about most mainstream scientists who are part of this set of living arrangements, part of civilization. You get paid a lot of money, relatively speaking, to be a mainstream scientist, to have access to a position of privilege such as a university faculty position or a government employee comes with a certain inability to tell the full truth about the dire nature of our situation. Instead, you're actually paid to lie. And I can say this with some authority because I was paid to lie for a long time. You're paid to promote this set of living arrangements and not point out that there are disadvantages associated with this set of living arrangements. You're paid to remain silent about the untoward outcomes of civilization. If you spend much time questioning government, questioning media, questioning the role of the university in educating the public, if you spend much time questioning the actual outcomes of this set of living arrangements, things such as dirtying the air and fouling the water and washing the soil into the ocean and promoting racism and promoting misogyny and promoting monetary disparity, if you point out those things in your classrooms or as a result of your research activities, you're not going to find much support for your position at the university or as a government scientist. So I'm not suggesting that you'll be fired. I wasn't. But you won't find much support. And if you don't find much support in the workplace, it becomes not a very fun place to work anymore. So there are myriad reasons that the mainstream media and the governments of the world don't want you to know the full information. For one thing, you might stop spending so much time and money on the hamster wheel, and you might actually become a human being instead of a human doing. You might actually sit back for extended periods of time and take breaks and live in nature as human beings evolved to do. You might spend time in the wilderness hiking instead of at your desk typing. You might spend time enjoying the natural world and enjoying the relationships in your life instead of showing up every day, jumping on the treadmill, going to the job you don't really like and for which you're supported to do in mediocre fashion instead of in excellent fashion. You know, pursuing excellence in a culture of mediocrity is a difficult task for anybody. And when you're not encouraged to do even that, even within your job, it might cause you to step away or maybe to work something less than 50 or 60 hours a week and work the 40 that you're paid for, or take all the vacation time you haven't coming to you every year, or take time out at the end of the day to spend time with the people you love. So I can think of lots of reasons that we aren't hearing about this from the mainstream media and the governments. They all have to do with money. They all have to do with greed. They all have to do with power. They all have to do with the transfer of all of those things, money and power, from the bottom to the top. Those are just my hypotheses about how we got to this point. I don't think any of us can know for sure unless you're in one of those positions of power where you never report the full truth. And so, of course, once you get to be in that position, you're privileged enough that you don't want people to know. So I don't think any of us involved in this conversation, anybody watching this video, anybody hearing these words, is going to find themselves in a position anytime soon to know why we're not being told the full information. But I think all of us know that we're not being provided all the information. How often do you hear about abrupt climate change? How often does anybody even consider the topic of human extinction in the near term? There are things we don't talk about in this set of living arrangements. The most important ones, the most important topics, are the ones we never discuss. Well, big surprise, we find ourselves in the midst of abrupt climate change leading to near-term human extinction, and nobody wants to have that conversation.